The buzzards had been circling overhead for the better part of an hour, when Beckett Nash spotted the broken-down stagecoach listing to one side like a dying animal in the middle of the Cimarron Desert. The year was 1881, and the Kansas sun beat down with the kind of merciless intensity that could kill a man in a matter of hours if he wasn't careful. Beckett had been riding from Dodge City back toward his family's ranch near Linden when he'd noticed the birds, their dark wings wheeling against the pale blue sky in that telltale pattern that meant something was dying or already dead out there in the wasteland. He urged his bay gelding, Roosevelt, into a steady trot, his hand instinctively moving to check the Colt revolver at his hip. At 26 years old, Beckett had seen enough of the frontier to know that caution kept a man breathing. The desert stretched out in every direction, endless waves of sand and scrub brush broken only by the occasional outcropping of red rock. Heat shimmered off the ground in visible waves, making the distant horizon dance and blur. As he drew closer, Beckett could make out more details. The stagecoach had lost a wheel, the axle dug deep into the sand at an awkward angle. The horses were gone, either run off or taken. No bodies lay sprawled in the sand, which he took as a good sign, but he couldn't see any movement either. The coach itself was painted a faded green, the gold lettering on the side barely legible after years of harsh weather. It belonged to the Butterfield Overland Mail Company, he realized, though what it was doing this far off the main route he couldn't fathom. Beckett pulled Roosevelt to a stop about 20 feet from the coach, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of trouble. Bandits sometimes used broken-down coaches as bait, luring in good Samaritans only to rob them blind or worse. But the desert was quiet except for the whisper of wind through the sage and the distant cry of those circling buzzards. "Hello, the coach," he called out, his voice carrying across the still air. "Anyone alive in there?" For a long moment, nothing. Then he heard it, faint but distinct, a cough, followed by a weak voice that was unmistakably female. "Help," the voice called. "Please help." Beckett dismounted quickly, tying Roosevelt's reins to what was left of the coach's brake lever. He approached cautiously, still half expecting an ambush, but when he yanked open the door and peered inside, he found only one occupant. A young woman lay crumpled on the floor of the coach, her traveling dress torn and dusty, her dark hair tangled and falling loose from what had once been an elegant arrangement. An ornate violin case lay beside her, remarkably intact despite the obvious violence of whatever had befallen the coach. Her eyes fluttered open as light flooded the interior. They were a striking shade of green, he noticed, bright and feverish in her pale face. She couldn't have been more than 23 or 24, and even in her current state, Beckett could see she was beautiful. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentling as he climbed into the coach. "I've got you. Can you tell me what happened?" "Horses," she managed, her lips cracked and bleeding. "Spooked by a rattlesnake. Driver tried to control them, but the wheel hit a rock, broke clean off. The driver and the guard, they went for help. Said they'd be back by nightfall. That was yesterday morning." Beckett felt anger surge through him. What kind of men would leave a woman alone in the desert like this? Even if they'd meant to come back, surely they must have known the dangers. "They left you," he said flatly. It wasn't a question, she nodded weakly. "They took the horses. Said it would be faster. I had water, but it ran out this morning. I thought I was going to die out here." "Not today," Beckett said firmly. He slipped his arms under her, lifting her as carefully as he could. She was lighter than he'd expected, and he felt a surge of protective anger toward the men who'd abandoned her. "Let's get you out of this oven." He carried her out into the open air, which wasn't much cooler, but at least offered the possibility of a breeze. Roosevelt nickered softly as Beckett set the young woman down in the shade cast by the broken coach. He grabbed his canteen and uncorked it, holding it to her lips. "Slow sips," he cautioned. "Too much too fast and you'll just bring it back up." She obeyed, drinking carefully, and he watched as some of the color began to return to her cheeks. When she'd had enough, she pushed the canteen away gently and looked up at him with those remarkable green eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Gina Nichols. Most people call me Gina." "Beckett Nash," he replied. "Call me Beck. What's a woman like you doing way out here in the middle of nowhere?" A ghost of a smile touched her cracked lips. "I'm a musician, a violinist. I was traveling from St. Louis to perform in some of the towns out west. Dodge City, Garden City, maybe even as far as Santa Fe if the opportunities presented themselves. The theatrical circuits don't pay much, but it's better than nothing, and I love to play." Beckett glanced at the violin case, still sitting in the coach. "That your instrument, my most precious possession," Gina confirmed. "It was my grandmother's. She brought it over from Italy when she immigrated. I'd sooner lose a limb than let anything happen to it." "Well, it seems to have survived better than the coach," Beckett observed. He looked around at their surroundings, calculating distances and water supply. "We're about 15 miles from Linden. That's the nearest town. I've got enough water for both of us if we're careful, and Roosevelt's strong enough to carry double. We'll have to leave the coach, but I can come back with a wagon for your things later." Gina nodded. "I don't have much besides the violin and a few changes of clothes. Nothing worth dying for." "Smart woman," Beckett said approvingly. He went back into the coach and retrieved her violin case along with a small carpet bag he found tucked under one of the seats. As he emerged, he noticed how she'd pulled herself up to lean against the coach's side, her face tilted up toward the sky despite the brutal sun. "You shouldn't look up like that," he said. "Sun'll blind you." "I know," she replied, but she didn't lower her gaze. "But I'm alive and I can feel it on my face, and right now that seems like the most wonderful thing in the world." Something in her words struck him, a kind of fierce joy in the face of near death that he'd rarely encountered. Most people he'd pulled out of bad situations were either too shocked or too grateful to express anything so philosophical. This woman, this Gina, had a different quality to her, something that spoke of depths he couldn't quite fathom. "Well, you can feel grateful to be alive once we're somewhere with actual shade and actual water," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "Think you can ride? Do I have a choice?" She asked, and there was humor in her voice now, faint but present. "Not really," Beckett admitted, "but I figured I'd ask to be polite." He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. She was tall for a woman, he noticed, the top of her head coming to just below his chin. Once she'd found her balance, he secured her belongings to Roosevelt's saddle, then mounted up himself. He reached down to help her up, and after a moment's fumbling, she settled in behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. "Hold on tight," he instructed. "It's going to be a long, hot ride." "I trust you," Gina said simply, and the words sent an odd feeling through his chest, warm and unsettling all at once. They set off at a steady walk, Roosevelt's hooves crunching in the sand. Beckett kept the pace even, mindful of both his horse's stamina and the woman's weakened state. The sun climbed higher, reaching its zenith, and the heat became almost unbearable. He could feel Gina's forehead resting against his back, could feel the slight tremor in her arms as she held on. "Talk to me," he said after they'd been riding for about an hour. "Keep yourself awake." "What should I talk about?" Her voice was drowsy, drifting. "Anything. Tell me about your music. Tell me why a well-educated woman like you is traveling alone through the frontier." She was quiet for a moment, and he worried she might be slipping into unconsciousness, but then she began to speak, her voice soft but clear. My father was a music professor in St. Louis, she said. He taught at a conservatory there. My mother died when I was young and he raised me alone, taught me everything he knew about music. The violin became my voice, the way I expressed everything I couldn't say with words. He always said I had a gift, that I could play with feeling, not just technical precision. Sounds like he loved you very much, Beckett observed. He did. He died last year, pneumonia. After that, there was nothing keeping me in St. Louis. No family, and the conservatory wouldn't hire a woman to teach, no matter how qualified. So I sold everything except my grandmother's violin and decided to try my luck out west. I'd heard there were theaters and saloons that hired musicians, places where a woman could make her own way if she was brave enough or desperate enough. Which were you? Beckett asked. Brave or desperate? Both, Gina admitted. Probably more desperate than brave if I'm being honest, but out here I thought maybe it wouldn't matter so much that I was a woman. Maybe people would just care about whether I could play. Beckett thought about that, about the kind of courage it took to leave everything familiar and strike out into unknown territory. He'd been born on the frontier, raised to ride and rope and shoot, and even for him, the harshness of this land could be overwhelming at times. What must it be like for someone from the city, someone who'd spent her life in drawing rooms and concert halls? You picked a hard place to start over, he said. The best things are usually hard, Gina replied. At least, that's what my father used to say. They rode on, and Beckett found himself wanting to know more about her, about the life she'd left behind and the life she was hoping to build. He asked questions, and she answered them, her voice growing stronger as she talked. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, about the riverboats and the music halls, about the first time she'd played in front of an audience and felt that rush of connection with listeners. She told him about her father's funeral, about packing up their small apartment, about the moment she'd decided to buy a ticket west and never look back. In turn, he found himself telling her about his own life, about growing up on his family's ranch outside Linden, about learning to work cattle and break horses alongside his father and older brother. He told her about the hard winters and the dry summers, about the constant struggle to keep the ranch running in the face of drought and disease and fluctuating beef prices. He told her about losing his mother to cholera when he was 15, about how his father had never really recovered from that loss, how he died 5 years later, leaving the ranch to Beckett and his brother, Benjamin. Benjamin's the one with the head for business, Beckett explained. He handles the books, deals with the buyers, all that. I'm better with the horses and the cattle, the actual work of ranching. We make a good team. It sounds like a hard life, Gina said. It is, Beckett agreed, but it's an honest one. And there's something about working the land, about building something with your own hands, that feels right to me. I think I understand that, Gina said thoughtfully. It's how I feel about music. When I play, I'm creating something that didn't exist before, something beautiful and fleeting and completely mine. The sun had passed its peak and begun its slow descent toward the western horizon when Linden finally came into view. It wasn't much of a town, just a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a modest steeple, a general store, a saloon, and a handful of houses scattered around the edges. But to Beckett, it was home, and to Gina, he imagined it must look like salvation. They rode down the main street, drawing curious looks from the few people who were out in the afternoon heat. Beckett guided Roosevelt directly to the doctor's office, a small building near the church. He dismounted and helped Gina down, catching her when her legs threatened to give out. "I've got you," he murmured, and he scooped her up again, carrying her toward the door. Dr. Samuel Wright was in his 50s, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and gentle hands. He took one look at Gina and immediately directed Beckett to lay her on the examination table in his office. While the doctor examined her, checking for signs of serious dehydration and heat exhaustion, Beckett gave him a brief account of how he'd found her. "She's lucky you came along when you did," Dr. Wright said grimly. "Another few hours and we'd be having a very different conversation. As it is, she needs rest, plenty of water and food when she can keep it down. I'd like to keep her here overnight for observation, make sure there are no complications." "Whatever she needs," Beckett said. "Send the bill to the Nash Ranch." Dr. Wright raised an eyebrow. "That's generous of you, seeing as you just met her." "Can't leave a woman stranded," Beckett said simply. "Wouldn't be right." He stayed while Dr. Wright gave Gina water and a light broth, watching as she sipped slowly, her color continuing to improve. When she'd finished, she looked over at him, her green eyes clearer now. "Thank you, Beckett," she said. "You saved my life out there." "Just did what anyone would do," he replied, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. Those men who left me, they were supposed to help and they ran. You could have ridden past, but you didn't. That means something." Before he could respond, Dr. Wright shooed him out, insisting that Gina needed rest. Beckett retrieved her belongings from Roosevelt and left them with the doctor, then rode slowly back to his ranch, his mind full of green eyes and a voice that spoke of music and courage. The Nash Ranch sat about 3 miles outside of town, a sprawling collection of buildings centered around a sturdy 2-story house built of whitewashed wood. Corrals and outbuildings spread out from the main house, and beyond them, the grasslands stretched toward distant hills. Cattle dotted the landscape, red and white shapes against the golden grass. Benjamin was in the barn when Beckett arrived, working on repairing a section of fence. He looked up as his younger brother entered, noting the thoughtful expression on Beckett's face. "You look like you've had an interesting day," Benjamin observed. He was 2 years older than Beckett, with the same dark hair but lighter brown eyes. Where Beckett was lean and rangy, built for the saddle, Benjamin was broader through the shoulders, built more for the hard labor of ranch work. "Found a woman in the desert," Beckett said. "Left by the men who were supposed to be helping her. Took her to Doc Wright's." Benjamin whistled low. "That's rough. She going to be all right? Doc thinks so. She's a musician traveling from St. Louis. Got caught in some bad luck with her stage coach." "And now you're thinking about her," Benjamin said, and it wasn't a question. Beckett glared at his brother. "I'm not thinking about anything except making sure she's all right." "Sure," Benjamin said, grinning. "Whatever you say, little brother." Over the next few days, Beckett found excuses to ride into town. He told himself he was just checking on Gina, making sure she was recovering properly, but Benjamin's knowing looks suggested his brother wasn't fooled. Dr. Wright had moved Gina to the boarding house run by Mrs. Martha Henderson after the first night, declaring her well enough to recuperate in more comfortable surroundings. The boarding house was a neat 2-story building painted pale yellow, with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Henderson was a widow in her 60s, a formidable woman with iron-gray hair and a sharp eye for propriety. She answered the door when Beckett knocked on the 3rd day after he'd brought Gina to town. "Mr. Nash," she said, her tone neutral. "I suppose you're here to see Miss Nichols again." "If she's up to receiving visitors," Beckett said politely. Mrs. Henderson studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "She's in the parlor, and I'll be in the next room, so keep the door open." "Yes, madam," Beckett said, suppressing a smile. Mrs. Henderson took her role as guardian of young women's reputations seriously, which he respected even if it was a bit inconvenient. He found Gina sitting in a rocking chair by the window, her violin in her lap. She was tuning it, her head tilted to listen to the strings. She looked up as he entered and a genuine smile crossed her face. "Beckett," she said warmly, "I was hoping you'd come by today. How are you feeling?" he asked, taking a seat on the sofa across from her. "Much better, Doctor. Wright says I'm nearly back to normal, though he wants me to take it easy for another week or so." She ran her fingers lightly over the violin strings. "I've been going stir-crazy, honestly. I'm not used to sitting still." "I know the feeling," Beckett said. "Ranch doesn't run itself." "And yet you keep finding time to visit me," Gina observed, her green eyes sparkling with something that might have been amusement or something deeper. Beckett felt heat rise in his cheeks, which annoyed him. He was a grown man, not some schoolboy. "Just wanted to make sure you're all right," he said gruffly. "I am, thanks to you." She paused, then said, "Would you like to hear me play? I've been dying to practice, and Mrs. Henderson is too polite to tell me if I'm driving her mad." "I'd like that," Beckett said, and he realized it was true. He wanted to hear what had driven her across half the country, wanted to understand what music meant to her. Gina positioned the violin under her chin, raised the bow, and began to play. The first notes were soft, almost tentative, but they quickly grew in confidence and volume. The melody was something Beckett had never heard before, something that started slow and mournful but gradually built into something faster, more joyful. It made him think of sunrise over the prairie, of winter giving way to spring, of every hard thing that ended in something beautiful. He watched her as she played, saw how her whole body moved with the music, how her eyes closed and her face took on an expression of pure concentration mixed with joy. This wasn't just technical skill, though she clearly had that in abundance. This was passion, the kind of complete devotion to something that transcended mere profession. When she finished, lowering the violin and opening her eyes, Beckett realized he'd been holding his breath. "That was incredible," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he'd intended. "I've never heard anything like it." Gina's smile was radiant. "That's one of my own compositions. I call it Journey West. I started writing it on the train from St. Louis, finished it in my head while I was waiting to die in that coach. Funny how facing death clarifies things." "You wrote that?" Beckett was stunned. He'd assumed she played other people's music, classical pieces written by long-dead composers. "I write a lot of my own music," Gina explained. "The classical repertoire is beautiful, but there's something special about creating something new, something that captures the specific moment you're living in." They talked for another hour, Beckett asking questions about music and composition, Gina curious about ranch life and the frontier. He found himself telling her things he rarely shared with anyone, about his dreams for the ranch, about the loneliness of frontier life, about the way the land could break you if you weren't careful, but also make you stronger than you'd ever imagined possible. "I think I understand that," Gina said thoughtfully. "Music can be the same way. It demands everything from you, breaks you down, and builds you back up. But when you get it right, when you create something truly beautiful, it makes all the struggle worthwhile." "Sounds like we have more in common than you'd think," Beckett observed. "Yes," Gina said, meeting his eyes. "I think we do." Over the following weeks, as Gina regained her strength, their meetings became regular occurrences. Beckett would ride into town every few days, always with some excuse, and they would talk, or he would listen to her play. Sometimes they walked down Linden's Main Street together, Mrs. Henderson trailing along as a chaperone, and Gina would ask him about the town and its people. Linden was small, with a population of maybe 200 souls, but it had the essentials. The general store run by old Mr. Peterson, the saloon owned by a former cavalryman named Jack Reeves, the church where Reverend Thomas gave his sermons every Sunday, and a handful of other businesses that served the ranchers and farmers in the surrounding area. It wasn't sophisticated or cultured, nothing like what Gina was used to, but there was a straightforward honesty to the place that she seemed to appreciate. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after he'd found her, Beckett arrived at the boarding house to find Gina in conversation with Jack Reeves on the porch. The saloon owner was a burly man in his 40s with a salt and pepper beard and a booming laugh, and he was gesturing animatedly as he talked. "Ah, Nash," Jack called out as Beckett approached. "Perfect timing. I was just trying to convince Miss Nichols here to play at the saloon. We could use some culture in this town, and I'm willing to pay fair wages." Beckett looked at Gina, trying to read her expression. Playing in a saloon wasn't exactly respectable work for a woman, though it was common enough on the frontier. But it was also dangerous in its way, putting her in close proximity to drunk cowboys and drifters who might get ideas. "What do you think?" he asked her directly. "I think I need to earn my keep somehow," Gina said practically. "Mrs. Henderson has been more than kind, but I can't impose on her charity forever, and Mr. Reeves has promised to ensure there's no trouble. You play, and any man who so much as looks at you wrong answers to me and my bartender," Jack said firmly. "We run a respectable establishment, or as respectable as a saloon can be." Beckett wanted to object, wanted to tell her she didn't need to work in a saloon, that he would help her find something else. But he saw the determination in her eyes and bit back his words. She'd come west to make her own way, and he had no right to stop her. "All right," he said. "But I'll be there every night you play, just to make sure." "My guardian angel," Gina said, and there was warmth in her voice that made his heart beat faster. She started playing at the saloon 3 nights a week, Friday through Sunday when the Cowboys came into town. The first night, Beckett positioned himself at a table near the small stage Jack had set up in the corner, nursing a whiskey and watching the room with the alertness of a hawk. When Gina took the stage, wearing a simple but elegant dark blue dress, a hush fell over the crowd. She began with a lively tune, something that got feet tapping and heads nodding. The cowboys and ranchers, men who'd probably never heard classical music in their lives, listened with rapt attention. Then she transitioned into something slower, more melancholic, and Beckett watched grown men get tears in their eyes, homesickness and longing written on their weathered faces. She played for an hour that first night, moving between fast and slow, joyful and sad, original compositions and familiar folk tunes. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, coins and even a few small nuggets of gold landing at her feet. Jack was grinning from ear to ear, already calculating the extra business she would bring in. Beckett waited for her after, walking her back to Mrs. Henderson's through the quiet streets. It was a clear night, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "You were amazing," he said. "Those men have probably never heard anything like that in their lives." "I could feel it," Gina said, her voice full of wonder. "The connection, I mean. It was like the music was flowing between us, creating this shared experience." "That's what I love most about performing, that sense of communion." "Communion," Beckett repeated, testing the word. "That's a good way to put it." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, then Gina said, "Can I tell you something strange?" "Sure." "When I play now, I think about the rhythm of Roosevelt's hooves in the sand when you were carrying me to safety. That steady, reliable beat. It's become part of my music somehow, working its way into my compositions." She laughed softly. "I know that probably sounds foolish." "It doesn't," Beckett said. His throat felt tight. "It sounds beautiful." She stopped walking and turned to face him, her green eyes luminous in the moonlight. "Your rhythm matches the beat of my heart," she said softly. I realized that the first day holding on to you as we rode. Your heartbeat against my cheek, the horse's steps, my own pulse, they all synced up into this one perfect rhythm. I've been trying to capture it in music ever since. Beckett didn't know what to say to that. He'd never been good with words, had always been more comfortable with actions than declarations. But standing there in the moonlight with this remarkable woman looking at him like he was something precious, he knew he had to try. I think about you all the time, he said. The words came out rough, unpracticed, but sincere. Every day when I'm working, I'm wondering what you're doing, if you're happy, if you're thinking about me too. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but it feels like longer. Feels like I've known you forever. I know, Gina whispered. I feel it too. He wanted to kiss her. The urge was almost overwhelming, but they were standing in the middle of the street where anyone could see, and he had too much respect for her reputation to risk it. I should get you home, he said reluctantly. Yes, she agreed, but neither of them moved for a long moment. Finally, Beckett offered his arm, and they walked the rest of the way to the boarding house in silence. At the door, Gina squeezed his hand briefly before disappearing inside, leaving him standing on the porch with his heart pounding and his mind racing. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Beckett threw himself into ranch duties during the day, helping Benjamin prepare for the fall cattle drive to market, but his evenings were spent in town, listening to Gina play or taking long walks with her through the surrounding countryside. Mrs. Henderson continued to chaperone, but she'd grown more lenient, often trailing far enough behind to give them the illusion of privacy. Gina was becoming part of the fabric of Linden. People greeted her on the street, and the ladies of the church had invited her to join their quilting circle. She still played at the saloon on weekends, but she'd also started giving music lessons to some of the town's children, holding classes in the church hall on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I never thought I'd end up teaching after all, she told Beckett one day as they sat beside the small creek that ran through his family's property. But I love it. These children, they're so eager to learn, so hungry for beauty in their lives. It reminds me why music matters. You're good for this town, Beckett said. Good for these people. They were getting by before you came, but now they have something more, something better. And what about you? Gina asked, turning to look at him. Am I good for you? You're everything for me, Beckett said simply. I love you, Gina. I've loved you since that first day, since you looked up at the sun and talked about being grateful to be alive. I know it's fast, and I know you have dreams that might take you away from here, but I had to tell you. I love you. Tears sprang to Gina's eyes, but she was smiling. I love you too, she said. I've been afraid to say it, afraid that it was too soon or that I was being foolish, but I do. I love you, Beckett Nash, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. This time, when he kissed her, there was no one around to see, no need to hold back. Her lips were soft against his, and she tasted like the peppermint tea she'd been drinking earlier. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened, becoming something more passionate, more desperate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beckett rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. I know it's fast, and I know I'm just a rancher without much to offer beyond a hard life and an honest one, but marry me. Build a life with me here. Yes, Gina said without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married 6 weeks later in the Linden church, with most of the town in attendance. Benjamin served as best man, and Mrs. Henderson, who'd become something of a surrogate mother to Gina, stood up as matron of honor. Gina wore a simple white dress that she'd sewn herself with help from the ladies of the quilting circle, and she carried wildflowers that Beckett had picked that morning. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, his voice solemn as he spoke about love and commitment, and the sanctity of marriage. When he pronounced them man and wife, the church erupted in cheers and applause. Beckett kissed his new wife with enthusiasm that made Mrs. Henderson tusk, and some of the younger cowboys whistle appreciatively. The reception was held in the church hall, with food donated by half the town and music provided by Gina and a few of her students. She played her violin while teaching a young boy named Tommy to accompany her on a borrowed fiddle, and the joy on both their faces was something Beckett knew he'd remember for the rest of his life. "You look happy," Benjamin said, coming up beside his brother as they watched Gina play. "I am," Beckett said simply. "Happier than I knew I could be." "She's good for you," Benjamin observed. "Makes you smile more, and she's good for the ranch, too. Did you know she's been helping me with the bookkeeping? Turns out she's got a head for numbers when she's not making music." Beckett hadn't known that, and the discovery made him love her even more. She was constantly surprising him, revealing new depths and talents he hadn't anticipated. That night, they went home to the ranch, to the bedroom Beckett had spent the last week preparing. He'd painted the walls, bought a new quilt from Mrs. Henderson's store, even picked more wildflowers to put in a vase on the dresser. It wasn't fancy, but he hoped it showed how much he cared. Gina stood in the doorway, taking it all in, then turned to him with tears in her eyes. "It's perfect," she said. "Everything is perfect." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that went beyond the physical. Beckett had been with women before, brief encounters in cow towns that had satisfied physical need but left him feeling empty. This was different. This was making love, not just having it, and every touch, every kiss, every whispered word felt sacred. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets with Gina's head on his chest, Beckett felt a contentment he'd never experienced before. He ran his fingers through her dark hair, marveling at how soft it was. "Tell me about your music," he said softly. "Tell me about this rhythm you hear, the one that matches your heart." Gina was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest. "It's hard to explain to someone who isn't a musician," she said finally, "but I'll try. When I compose, I'm always searching for the right rhythm, the heartbeat of the piece. It's the foundation everything else builds on. And when I was out there in the desert, dying of thirst and heat, I kept hearing this rhythm in my head. Steady, reliable, like a heartbeat or a horse's walk. It was the only thing that kept me sane, the only thing that made me believe I might survive. And then I showed up," Beckett said. "And then you showed up," Gina confirmed. "And the rhythm I'd been hearing, it was real. It was you, your heartbeat, Roosevelt's footsteps. It was the sound of salvation and safety and everything I'd been hoping for. And now when I compose, that rhythm is always there, underlying everything I create. You're in my music now, Beckett. You're part of every note I play." "That might be the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me," Beckett murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "It's just the truth," Gina said. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the lamplight. "You saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me a home, a purpose, a future. How could I not love you? I'm the lucky one," Beckett insisted. "You could have gone anywhere, done anything. You could have moved on to bigger towns, better opportunities. But you stayed." "I stayed because this is where I belong," Gina said firmly. "With you in this place, building this life. All those dreams I had about performing in concert halls and becoming famous, they seem so small now compared to what I have here. Real connection, real community, real love. That's worth more than all the applause in the world." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Beckett dreamed of music and wide open spaces and a future full of promise. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment for both of them. Gina had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and the hard work, the way everything depended on the weather and the health of the cattle, and 1,000 other factors beyond their control. Beckett had to learn to accommodate another person in his life, to consider someone else's needs and desires alongside his own. But they worked at it, both of them committed to making their marriage succeed. Gina continued to teach music lessons and play at the saloon on weekends, but she also learned to help around the ranch. She couldn't rope a steer or brand a calf, but she could keep the books, manage the household, and cook meals for the ranch hands during busy seasons. More than that, she brought beauty into Beckett's life in ways he hadn't known he was missing. She would play her violin in the evenings, filling the house with music. She planted a garden outside their bedroom window, flowers and herbs that bloomed in riotous color. She read to him from books she ordered from back east, opening up worlds of literature and poetry he'd never explored. In turn, Beckett showed her the beauty of the frontier, taught her to see the artistry in a good rope throw, the grace of a well-trained horse, the subtle colors of a prairie sunset. He took her riding across the grasslands, showed her the hidden places he'd discovered as a boy, the small oasis where cottonwoods grew around a spring, the hilltop where you could see for miles in every direction. "I never understood how beautiful this place was until I saw it through your eyes," Gina told him one day as they sat on that hilltop, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and red. "And I never understood how empty my life was until you filled it with music," Beckett replied. Benjamin watched their happiness with approval and perhaps a touch of envy. He was engaged himself now, to a sensible young woman named Sarah Porter, whose father owned the general store, but it was more a marriage of practical convenience than passionate love. Still, he was genuinely glad for his brother's happiness. "You got lucky," Benjamin told Beckett one day as they worked on repairing a section of fence. "Finding someone who fits so perfectly with you." "I know," Beckett said. "I thank God for it every day. Think she'll ever regret it?" Benjamin asked. "Giving up the city and her dreams of performing for a ranch wife's life?" "I don't think so," Beckett said confidently. "But I make sure to ask her regularly, make sure she's happy. If she ever wanted to leave to go back to performing full-time, I'd support her." Even if it meant leaving the ranch, Beckett paused, considering the question seriously. "Even then," he said finally, "because my life is wherever she is. The ranch is important, but she's essential." That conversation stayed with him, and that night, after they'd gone to bed, he broached the subject with Gina. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here, giving up your dreams of performing in bigger places?" Gina rolled over to face him, her expression serious in the moonlight filtering through the window. "No," she said firmly. "I don't regret it, but I appreciate you asking, appreciate you caring about whether I'm happy." "I want you to be happy," Beckett said. "That's all I've ever wanted." "I am happy," Gina assured him. "But I'll tell you something. My dreams haven't gone away, they've just changed shape. I still want to perform, still want to share my music with as many people as possible. But now I want to do it from here, from this place that's become my home. What would you think about hosting concerts here at the ranch? We could build a small performance space, invite people from all the surrounding towns. Bring culture to the frontier instead of leaving the frontier to find culture." The idea was unexpected but immediately appealing. "You really think people would come?" Beckett asked. "I think people are starving for beauty out here," Gina said. "I see it every time I play at the saloon, every time I teach those children. They want art and music and theater, but they don't have access to it. We could change that." "Then let's do it," Beckett said. "We'll start small, maybe just a few concerts a year. If it works, we can expand." They began planning the next day. Benjamin was skeptical at first, worried about the cost and the practicality of it. But Sarah, his fiancée, loved the idea and helped bring him around. They decided to convert one of the large barns into a performance space, adding proper seating and a stage. Gina reached out to musicians she'd met during her travels, inviting them to come perform. Word spread, and soon people from Linden and the surrounding area were talking about the upcoming concert series at the Nash Ranch. The first concert was held in early October, when the worst of the summer heat had passed, but before the winter cold set in. They'd sent notices to towns within a 50-mile radius, and to Beckett's amazement, people came. Families arrived in wagons, cowboys rode in on horseback, and even a few folks came by train from larger towns, making the trek to Linden and then out to the ranch. The converted barn looked beautiful, with lanterns hanging from the rafters and chairs arranged in neat rows. Gina had decorated with wildflowers and wheat sheaves, giving the space a rustic elegance that perfectly captured the spirit of the frontier. She opened the concert herself, playing a new composition she called Prairie Song. It started with a single note, long and clear, then built into something complex and layered, capturing the vastness and the loneliness and the fierce beauty of the land. When she finished, the audience sat in stunned silence for a moment before erupting into applause. Other musicians followed, a pianist who'd traveled from Topeka, a folk singer from Dodge City, even a small string quartet from Kansas City. The concert lasted 3 hours, and when it was over, people lingered, talking and laughing, reluctant to let the magic of the evening end. "You did it," Beckett told Gina as they watched the last of the wagons roll away down the long drive. "You brought beauty to the frontier." "We did it," Gina corrected, leaning against him. "This was your vision as much as mine." The concert series became a regular event, held 4 times a year. It brought in extra income for the ranch, but more importantly, it gave the community something to look forward to, something that elevated their lives beyond the daily struggle for survival. 2 years into their marriage, Gina discovered she was pregnant. She told Beckett one evening after supper, her face glowing with happiness and nervousness. "A baby," Beckett said, the words not quite real yet. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Gina asked anxiously. "Happy." Beckett swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "I'm over the moon. This is the best news you could have given me." He set her down carefully, suddenly worried about jostling her. "Are you feeling all right? Should you be working? Does Dr. Wright know?" "I'm fine," Gina assured him, amused by his sudden concern. "Women have babies all the time out here. I'm healthy and strong, and Dr. Wright says everything looks perfect. The baby should come in the spring." Beckett immediately began planning, wanting to make sure everything was perfect for Gina and their child. He added another room to the house, creating a nursery. He made sure Dr. Wright was available and willing to attend the birth. He even ordered books from back east about childbirth and infant care. Determined to be prepared, Gina continued her music lessons and performances through most of the pregnancy, only stopping in the final month when the physical demands became too much. The women of Linden rallied around her, hosting a baby shower and providing advice, baby clothes, and support. The baby arrived on a warm April morning, after a labor that lasted most of the night and into the dawn. Beckett stayed by Gina's side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. When their son finally entered the world, red-faced and squalling, Beckett felt tears streaming down his face. "A boy," Dr. Wright announced, placing the baby on Gina's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." "Thomas," Gina said, looking up at Beckett. "After your father, can we call him Thomas? Thomas Nash, Beckett said, testing the name. It's perfect. He reached out to touch his son's tiny hand, marveling at the miniature fingers that immediately curled around his much larger one. This small person, this perfect combination of him and Gina, was depending on them for everything. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the love he felt. Fatherhood changed Beckett in ways he hadn't anticipated. He became more cautious, more aware of the dangers inherent in ranch life. He also became more ambitious, wanting to build something substantial that he could pass on to his son. The ranch began to expand, Beckett and Benjamin purchasing additional land and increasing their herd. Gina took to motherhood with the same passion she brought to everything else. She nursed Thomas while composing new pieces in her head, sang to him constantly, and as soon as he was old enough to hold anything, placed a small drum in his hands and taught him about rhythm. "He's going to be a musician," she declared confidently when Thomas was about 6 months old and banging enthusiastically on anything within reach. "He might be a rancher," Beckett countered, but he was smiling. "He can be both," Gina said. "The world doesn't have to be one or the other." "Look at us." She had a point. They'd created a life that honored both their passions, blending ranching and music into something unique and fulfilling. There was no reason Thomas couldn't do the same. The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to boy, showing signs of both his parents' temperaments. He loved music as his mother had predicted, but he also loved the outdoors, loved helping his father with the horses and cattle. Benjamin and Sarah married and had children of their own, 2 daughters who became Thomas's playmates and partners in mischief. The concert series at the ranch continued to grow, attracting more musicians and larger audiences. Gina's reputation as a composer spread, and she began receiving requests from musicians back east who wanted to perform her works. She always sent them the sheet music with pride, knowing that her music was touching people far beyond the Kansas prairie. When Thomas was 5, Gina discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the baby was a girl, born in the middle of a snowstorm in February. They named her Rose after Gina's mother, and she was the opposite of Thomas in temperament, quiet and thoughtful where he was boisterous and energetic. "Our family is complete," Gina said as she nursed Rose. Thomas curled up beside her on the bed, listening to his mother hum softly. "It's perfect," Beckett agreed, sitting in a chair he'd pulled close, his hand resting on Thomas's head. "Everything is perfect." But life on the frontier was never easy for long. The year Rose turned 2, a drought struck Kansas. The grass turned brown and withered, the creek on their property dried to a trickle, and the cattle began to die. It was the worst drought anyone could remember, and ranchers throughout the region struggled to survive. Beckett worked from dawn to dusk, trying to keep his herd alive, drilling new wells, hauling water from distant sources. The concert series had to be suspended, the performance barn converted back to storage for the precious hay they'd managed to harvest. Money became tight, then scarce, and for the first time since they'd married, Beckett began to worry about providing for his family. Gina saw his stress and worry, and she made a decision. She resumed playing at the saloon full-time, 5 nights a week instead of 3, and she increased her teaching schedule. Every penny she earned went into the ranch, helping to buy feed and supplies. "You don't have to do this," Beckett told her one night as she prepared to leave for another performance. "This isn't your burden to carry." "We're partners," Gina said firmly. "What affects you affects me. What threatens the ranch threatens our family. I'm doing what I can to help, just like you are." "I should be able to provide for you," Beckett said, frustration and shame evident in his voice. "That's my job as your husband. Gina crossed the room and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Your job as my husband is to love me and be faithful to me and work alongside me to build our life. That's exactly what you're doing. This drought isn't your fault, and we'll get through it together." Her words helped, but Beckett still felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He pushed himself harder, working longer hours, taking risks he wouldn't normally take. It was during one of these risks, trying to move cattle to better grazing land, that his horse stepped in a gopher hole and went down, throwing Beckett hard against the rocky ground. He woke up in his own bed with a splitting headache and Dr. Wright leaning over him, looking concerned. "Broken collarbone," the doctor announced. "Couple of cracked ribs. Concussion. You're lucky you didn't break your neck." "The cattle," Beckett tried to say, attempting to sit up. "The cattle are fine," Benjamin said from the doorway. "I got them moved. You just focus on healing." But healing took time they didn't have. For 6 weeks, Beckett was largely confined to the house, able to do only light work. It drove him crazy with frustration, but it also gave him time with his children, time to see how much they'd grown, how much he'd been missing while working himself to exhaustion. Thomas was 7 now, a bright, energetic boy who asked constant questions about everything. Rose was 4, quieter but equally curious, preferring to observe before acting. They would climb into bed with Beckett during his convalescence, and Gina would bring her violin, playing soft melodies while the children told their father about their days. "This is nice," Thomas said one evening, snuggled against Beckett's good side. "I wish you didn't have to work so much, Papa." The words hit Beckett like a punch to the gut. He'd been so focused on providing, on surviving, that he'd neglected the simple act of being present with his family. "You're right," he said, ruffling his son's hair. "And when I'm better, I'm going to make sure I spend more time with you. Both of you," he added, pulling Rose close with his good arm. "Promise?" Rose asked in her soft voice. "Promise," Beckett confirmed. When the rains finally came in late autumn, breaking the drought, it felt like divine intervention. The grass began to green up, the creek filled again, and the cattle that had survived began to regain their weight and health. The ranch had taken a financial hit, but they'd survived, unlike many of their neighbors who'd been forced to sell out or simply abandon their claims. True to his word, Beckett began to delegate more, trusting Benjamin to handle things he'd previously insisted on doing himself. He spent more time with Thomas and Rose, teaching them to ride, taking them fishing in the creek, reading to them in the evenings. The concert series resumed, and the family made it a tradition to perform together. Gina on violin, Thomas on a small fiddle, and even Rose banging on a tambourine. Those performances became some of Beckett's most treasured memories, watching his family share the joy of music with their community. He never learned to play an instrument himself, his fingers too calloused and clumsy for the delicate work. But he learned to appreciate music in ways he never had before, understanding it not just as entertainment, but as a form of communication and connection. The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father but with his mother's artistic soul. He went to college in Topeka, studying business and music, then returned to help run the ranch while also teaching music alongside his mother. Rose was quieter, more studious, and she eventually became a teacher in Lyndon's small school, bringing the same passion for education that Gina had brought to music. Benjamin and Sarah's daughters grew up and married, one staying in Lyndon, the other moving to Denver with her husband. The Nash Ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. The concert series became famous throughout Kansas and beyond, drawing musicians and audiences from hundreds of miles away. Through it all, Beckett and Gina remained devoted to each other. They celebrated their 20th anniversary with a grand concert and party that drew people from throughout the state. At the celebration, Gina performed a new composition she'd been working on in secret, a piece she called "The Rhythm of Us." It began with a simple, steady beat, like hoofbeats or a heartbeat. Then layers built on top, complex and beautiful, representing their life together, their children, their community, everything they'd built. The piece moved through different movements, some fast and joyful, others slow and melancholic, capturing both the triumphs and struggles of their years together. It ended as it began, with that steady, unchanging rhythm, the heartbeat that had never faltered. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the barn. Beckett stood and walked to the stage, pulling his wife into his arms and kissing her in front of everyone, not caring who saw or what they thought. "That was our life," he said when they finally broke apart. "Everything we are, everything we've been through, all in music." "That's what you gave me," Gina said, tears streaming down her face. "A life worth writing music about, a rhythm that never fails, never falters. You're the heartbeat of everything good in my life." "And you're the music in mine," Beckett replied. The next decade brought new challenges and new joys. Thomas married a young woman named Elizabeth, a pianist he'd met at one of their concerts, and they gave Beckett and Gina 3 grandchildren. Rose married later, to a school teacher from Garden City, and they had 2 children of their own. The Nash Ranch continued to expand, now run primarily by Thomas while Beckett transitioned into a more advisory role. Beckett and Gina spent more time traveling, visiting the grandchildren, occasionally going back east to see Gina perform in some of the concert halls she'd once dreamed of. But they always came home to Linden, to the ranch, to the life they'd built together. On their 30th anniversary, they took a trip back to the Cimarron Desert, the place where their story had begun. The stagecoach was long gone, of course, scavenged for parts or buried by shifting sands. But they found the spot, or close enough to it, and stood together in the afternoon heat, remembering. "I was dying when you found me," Gina said softly. "Not just physically, though that was real enough, but dying inside too, losing hope, losing faith that I'd made the right choice in coming west." "And now?" Beckett asked, his arm around her waist. "Now I know I was exactly where I was supposed to be," Gina said. "Everything in my life led me to that broken-down coach, to you finding me, to this life we've built. I wouldn't change a single thing, not even the near-death experience." Beckett asked with a slight smile. "Not even that," Gina confirmed, "because it brought me you, it brought me home." They stood there for a long time, 2 people no longer young but still deeply in love, connected by a rhythm that had endured for 3 decades, and would endure for however many more they had. Beckett was 60 when his health began to decline. A lifetime of hard ranch work had taken its toll on his body, arthritis settling into his joints, his back aching more days than not. Dr. Wright, now an old man himself, prescribed rest and lighter work, advice Beckett tried to follow but often ignored. Gina watched him with concern, but she knew better than to try to force him to slow down more than he was willing. Instead, she made sure he took his medicines, that he didn't push himself too hard, that he spent time with the grandchildren who adored him. On a clear autumn evening, when Beckett was 63 and Gina 61, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Thomas and Elizabeth were in town, but they'd be back soon for supper. Rose and her family were coming for the weekend. Life was full and good. "I've been thinking about that day I found you," Beckett said suddenly. How easy it would have been to ride past, to assume the coach was abandoned, to mind my own business. But you didn't, Gina said, reaching over to take his hand. But I didn't, Beckett agreed. And that choice, that one moment of deciding to investigate instead of ride on, it changed everything, gave me everything. You, the children, the grandchildren, this life. All of it came from that one choice. I think about it too, Gina admitted. About how close I came to dying out there, about how different my life would have been if you hadn't come along, or if someone else had found me, someone who wasn't you. Do you still hear it? Beckett asked. The rhythm, Gina smiled. Every day. Every time my heart beats, every time I pick up my violin, every time I see you walk across the yard. It's always there, the rhythm that saved my life and gave me a new one. Your rhythm matches the beat of my heart, Beckett said, quoting her words from so many years ago. That's what you told me. I think about that a lot. It's still true, Gina said. It will always be true. We're synchronized, you and I, two hearts beating as one. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of dinner being prepared, the grandchildren being called to wash their hands. Normal, everyday sounds that represented everything they'd built together. Beckett lived another 10 years, long enough to see all his grandchildren grow into young adults, long enough to celebrate 43 years of marriage to the woman he loved. When he finally passed away, quietly in his sleep at the age of 73, it was with Gina beside him, holding his hand, humming the melody of The Rhythm of Us. The funeral was held in Linden's church, the same place where they'd been married so many years before. The building was packed with people whose lives had been touched by Beckett Nash, ranchers and townspeople, musicians and teachers, family and friends. They spoke of his integrity, his kindness, his dedication to his family and his community. But it was Gina who gave the final eulogy, standing straight and dignified despite her grief, her green eyes still bright even through her tears. My husband was not a complicated man, she said, her voice steady. He believed in hard work, in keeping your word, in treating people fairly. He believed in family, in community, in building something that would last beyond himself. And he believed in love, the kind of deep, abiding love that doesn't waver or fade but grows stronger with every passing year. She paused, gathering herself. Beckett saved my life the day he found me dying in the desert. But he did more than that. He gave my life meaning and purpose. He gave me a home, a family, a place where I belonged. And he loved me with a constancy that never failed, a rhythm that never faltered, a heartbeat that was always, always steady. Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and Thomas came to stand beside her, his arm around his mother's shoulders. He was the best man I ever knew, Gina finished. And I will love him until the day I die and beyond. She sat down, and the church was silent except for the sound of quiet weeping. Then, slowly, she stood again and walked to the front where her violin case rested. She took out her grandmother's violin, the one that had survived the desert and everything that came after, and she began to play. The melody was The Rhythm of Us, but different now, transformed by grief into something even more beautiful and heartbreaking. She played it all the way through, not a single note wavering, and when she finished, she looked up toward the ceiling as if she could see through it to wherever Beckett had gone. Your rhythm matches the beat of my heart, she whispered. Always. Gina lived for another 12 years after Beckett's death, and she lived them fully. She continued to teach, to perform, to compose. She watched her grandchildren grow up and have children of their own. She saw the Nash Ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's leadership. She saw the concert series she and Beckett had founded become an established institution, drawing musicians from around the world. But she never remarried, never even considered it. Beckett had been her great love, the man who'd saved her life and given her a purpose, and no one could replace him. She felt his presence with her always, heard his rhythm in every beat of her heart, saw his legacy in the faces of their children and grandchildren. On a spring morning in 1923, at the age of 84, Gina Nichols Nash passed away peacefully in her sleep, in the same bed where she'd slept beside her husband for 43 years. She was found with a smile on her face, her hand resting on the pillow where Beckett's head had once lain. The funeral was even larger than Beckett's had been, attended by hundreds of people from all over Kansas and beyond. Musicians came from as far as New York and San Francisco to pay their respects to the woman who'd brought culture to the frontier. Her students, now adults with children and grandchildren of their own, spoke of how she'd changed their lives, opened their minds to beauty and possibility. They buried her beside Beckett in the Linden Cemetery, under a cottonwood tree that provided shade from the harsh Kansas sun. On her headstone, at Thomas's request, they engraved a simple epitaph: "Your rhythm matched the beat of my heart." The Nash family continued to thrive for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story that had begun with a cowboy and a stranded musician in the desert. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. The concert series continued, becoming known throughout the region as one of the premier venues for classical music in the Midwest. Thomas's son, named Beckett after his grandfather, became a renowned composer, taking his grandmother's style and building on it, creating works that were performed in concert halls around the world. But he always came back to Linden, to the ranch, to the place where it had all started. Rose's daughter, named Gina after her grandmother, became a music teacher herself, carrying on the tradition of bringing music education to the children of Kansas. She founded a music school in Topeka that still exists today, offering scholarships to talented students who couldn't otherwise afford lessons. The legacy of Beckett and Gina Nash extended far beyond their own lives, touching countless others through their commitment to family, community, and the transformative power of both hard work and art. They'd taken two very different worlds, the practical frontier ranching life and the artistic world of music, and woven them together into something unique and lasting. Decades after their deaths, when the old ranch house was being renovated by yet another generation of Nashes, workers found a sealed box hidden in the attic. Inside were letters Beckett had written to Gina during their courtship, along with sheet music in Gina's hand, early drafts of compositions that would later become famous. There was also a journal, kept by Gina, chronicling their life together from that first day in the desert through 43 years of marriage. The family gathered to read through the materials, crying and laughing as they learned new details about the ancestors who'd founded their legacy. The journal entries revealed the depth of love between Beckett and Gina, the challenges they'd faced, the joys they'd shared, the ordinary and extraordinary moments that made up a life. One entry, dated the evening of their 20th anniversary, stood out. "Tonight Beckett told me I was the music in his life, and it struck me how perfectly that captures what we are to each other. He is the rhythm, the steady, reliable beat that everything else builds on. I am the melody, the complexity and beauty that dances over that foundation. Alone, we would each be incomplete. Together, we create something harmonious and whole. That's what love is, I think. Not two separate people who happen to occupy the same space, but two different instruments playing in perfect sync, creating a song that neither could create alone. Tonight, As I played for him and watched his face light up with pride and love, I understood that this is what I was meant for. Not fame or fortune or the applause of thousands, but this. Creating beauty with and for the person I love in this place we've built together, surrounded by the family we've made. The rhythm of us continues, steady and true, and I know it will echo long after we're gone. The family decided to publish selections from the journal along with Gina's compositions and Beckett's letters, creating a book that told their story. It became a regional bestseller, inspiring countless people with its tale of love, resilience, and the unexpected ways life can unfold. The concert series was renamed the Beckett and Gina Nash Memorial Concert Series, ensuring that their names and their vision would be remembered for generations to come. Each year, on the anniversary of the day Beckett found Gina in the desert, the series holds a special performance, always ending with Gina's composition, The Rhythm of Us. The old barn where they held their first concert still stands, now carefully preserved as a historic landmark. Visitors come from all over to see it, to stand in the space where so much beauty was created and shared. A plaque on the wall tells the story of Beckett and Gina, of how a cowboy's choice to investigate a broken-down stagecoach led to a love story that inspired a community and created a lasting legacy. The Nash Ranch continues to operate, still owned by descendants of Beckett and Gina. They run cattle as Beckett did, but they also maintain the concert series and support music education throughout Kansas. It's a perfect blend of the practical and the artistic, honoring both sides of their ancestors' legacy. In Linden's small museum, there's a permanent exhibit dedicated to Beckett and Gina. It includes Gina's violin, the one her grandmother brought from Italy, carefully preserved in a climate-controlled case. Next to it is Beckett's saddle, the one he was using the day he found her. There are photographs, documents, newspaper clippings, and recordings of Gina's music. But the centerpiece of the exhibit is a large painting, commissioned by Thomas before his death, depicting that crucial moment in the desert. A cowboy on horseback approaching a broken-down stagecoach, the beginning of a love story that would echo through the generations. Visitors to the exhibit often comment on the painting, on the way the artist captured the harsh beauty of the desert, the determination on the cowboy's face, the fragile hope of the situation. But what draws the most comments is what the artist added based on Thomas's instructions. If you look closely at the painting, you can see musical notes floating in the air between the cowboy and the coach, visible only if you know to look for them. They represent the rhythm that would connect two hearts, the melody that would define a life, the song that would never end. The story of Beckett Nash and Gina Nichols Nash became part of the folklore of Kansas, one of those tales that gets told and retold, each generation adding their own understanding and emphasis. Some versions focus on the romance, the love at first sight element that seems almost too perfect to be real. Others emphasize the partnership aspect, the way they built something lasting together, combining their different strengths into a unified whole. But all versions of the story agree on the central truth, that sometimes, in the midst of desolation and despair, salvation appears in unexpected forms. That the rhythm of one person's heartbeat can sync perfectly with another's, creating harmony where there was once only isolation. That love, real love, isn't just about passion or romance, but about showing up day after day, building a life together one moment at a time. The desert where Beckett found Gina has changed over the years. The route that the stagecoach was traveling is now a paved highway. The endless expanse of sand and scrub has been broken up by development, by the slow but steady progress of civilization. But if you know where to look, You can still find places that look much as they did in 1881. Still feel the harsh beauty that nearly killed Gina and brought Beckett riding to her rescue. Sometimes, on clear nights when the stars are bright and the wind is calm, locals swear they can hear the faint sound of a violin carried on the breeze, playing a melody that sounds like heartbeats and hoofbeats and hope. They call it Gina's song, and they take it as a good omen, a reminder that beauty can flourish even in the harshest places, that love can take root in the most unlikely soil. The story ends as all stories must, but the rhythm continues. It echoes in the hearts of descendants who never knew Beckett and Gina but carry their legacy forward. It sounds in the music that still fills the old barn 4 times a year. It beats in the steady work of running a ranch with integrity and care. It resonates in the choice to bring beauty into the world, to teach and create and share. Your rhythm matches the beat of my heart. 5 simple words that captured everything Gina felt that first day, holding on to Beckett as Roosevelt carried them toward safety. 5 words that defined a marriage, a life, a legacy. 5 words that remind us all that love, at its core, is about finding someone whose rhythm syncs with your own, creating a harmony that neither could achieve alone. In the end, that's what Beckett and Gina Nash gave to the world. A perfect example of what love can be when 2 people commit completely to each other and to building something beautiful together. A reminder that salvation can come from unexpected sources, that purpose can be found in unlikely places, and that the rhythm of true love, once established, never really ends but echoes forward through time, inspiring and influencing long after the original hearts have stopped beating. Their story is a testament to the power of choice, of compassion, of courage. It's a celebration of the frontier spirit that built the American West, but also of the artistic spirit that brought beauty and culture to that wild land. It's a love story, yes, but it's also a story about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone, about the way one life can ripple outward, touching countless others in ways we can never fully predict or understand. And so the rhythm continues, steady and true, the beat of 2 hearts that found each other in the desert and chose to walk forward together, creating music out of silence, beauty out of hardship, and love out of the most unlikely of beginnings. The rhythm continues, and it always will, as long as there are people who remember the story of a cowboy and a musician, a broken-down stagecoach and a choice to help, a rhythm that matched the beat of a heart and changed everything.